Hello, my name is Philip Webb from Hymns of Grace, and we've gathered together today to explore the issue of psalm singing and what are some of the challenges that exist with that. And I just want to start out with a short introduction. I grew up in church. My father was a Baptist minister, and I've grown up with a tradition of congregational singing and always being a part of that, carrying great memories from that. But I have to admit, the Psalms did not play a part of that. And even today, the Psalms don't play a great part of the congregational singing and the worship that I do enter into in my own home church. And I want to know why. And I want to know, are there things that we can do to help that and to encourage that? And I guess what kind of sparked my interest was I saw a video, an interview with Bono of the rock band U2, where he talked about the Psalms and the importance of singing the Psalms and the themes that were in the Psalms. And I just thought, my goodness, he's thinking about this. He's thinking about how important the Psalms are, and we're not. And that just really struck me as we had missed the ball somehow. So I've invited Kevin Twit, Indelible Grace, Bob Kauflin, Sovereign Grace, and Matt Boswell, Doxology and Theology, to come together and to talk about this and find ways that we can encourage the body of Christ to participate more fully in the singing of psalms. So guys, I appreciate you coming together. Mm-hmm. I'm not an expert on this. You guys have a lot more experience and knowledge than I do. First of all, what are some of the challenges or reasons that you see that congregations are not singing psalms as a tradition? I know there's some new ones springing up and some things, but what hinders churches from really entering into that? Kevin, you probably have a little different perspective than us, a little different sphere. Could you give us some thoughts on that?
Sure. So, I'm in the Presbyterian Church, right. PCA.
What?
Yeah. So, our theological tradition is psalm singing,
right?
Via Calvin. That's kind of the tradition, the stream that I come from. And there's actually still maybe a lot of PCA churches that still sing at least one psalm or sing a good number of psalms. But I think, honestly, a lot of it is the shifting theological winds. I find, one of the things Indelible Grace music is about trying to find songs that are more honest about struggle. Mm-hmm. So I think the lack of singing psalms is part of that, but I think there were a lot of great hymns about struggle that got cast away as well. And so I feel like in our day and age, the Psalms are one of the ways, and a really important way to try to get the full range of human emotion. Mm-hmm. Calvin, in the preface to his commentary on the Psalms, has this brilliant phrase. He says that the Psalter is an anatomy of the soul, that there's not an emotion common to mankind that you won't find represented there. And sometimes you don't even know what you're feeling until you sing the Psalms. Mm-hmm. So I think it's, supremely important. But I do think that some of the uncomfortableness with singing sad songs and thinking that that's a legitimate part of Christian worship has got to have contributed to in some ways, I think.
Okay. Matt, do you sing psalms in your worship services?
Regrettably, no. It's an interesting thing to try to trace back why psalm singing has declined. Surely revivalism is a piece of it. Mm-hmm. Surely commercialism is a piece of it. There's a pastoral function that seems to, in some traditions, have dissipated to the neglect of robust theological singing, whether it be psalms or hymns.
Right.
And with that, we've forgotten the Psalms. I'm speaking from a free church, evangelical, big E kind of experience.
Right.
Most evangelical churches are not singing the Psalms regularly. I think that's to our neglect.
And certainly don't have a tradition of singing them.
Well, kind of. So let me
if you go back far.
So now I'll speak as a Baptist.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Baptists sang the Psalms only until the 1680s, and then introduced hymns. And so surely we need to be careful in this conversation not to be reactionary
Right.
and say, well, we're not singing psalms, so let's all move back to that direction and neglect hymn singing.
Right.
Because there was much blood spilled and much ink spilled over being able to sing hymns in the first place.
Right. Right.
And so we have to have carefulness of thought in this conversation. But it requires intentionality.
Yeah.
Bob, are you using Psalms?
Only by accident. Joy to the World, especially Psalm 98.
Yeah.
No, not typically. And as we're talking about this, I'm thinking two things. One is the way our songs are, the way modern songs are set up, but it's not just modern songs. We tend to rhyme lines and words, whereas the Psalms rhyme ideas. So it just doesn't fit as naturally into what we do, what we're used to. But more currently, I think we live in a culture of instant gratification. And the Psalms do not deliver instant gratification. They deliver a knowledge of God through the trials and successes and failures and hardships of life. And people don't want to wait around for that. We want a chorus that will instantly make us feel something.
Yeah.
And the Psalms are just not written that way. And you can't know God that way. Because God's not all about giving us emotional buzzes.
Yeah.
Right.
He's about us knowing Him. So I think that just really fights against, psalm singing.
I was thinking about this. I mean, what you're saying is basically, one of the things that I think is so important in any conversation about worship and singing is that worship is formative.
Yes, yes.
Like it or not, and that's what you're saying.
Right.
Like even the length of a psalm is teaching you something about the Christian life.
Right.
There are some days when you end with Psalm 88,
Yes.
darkness is my closest friend, and it doesn't resolve.
Yeah.
Now there's Psalm 89,
Yes.
comes next,
Right.
but there are times when you end with Psalm 88. And that's a really, disturbing idea. I was thinking, going through the 70s, 80s, and kind of the early praise songs, often you'd sing something that would be called a psalm, but it would be only a couple verses from the psalm.
Right.
And I saw here, as we were opening up, I was looked over on your iPad there, you had the Bible turned to Psalm 139. And I remember one time talking with a college student who had suffered pretty grievous abuse and was really struggling to believe that God could be with her. And I remember thinking about this Amy Grant song, Everywhere You Go, and thinking, oh, that's Psalm 139. That would be really comforting. And we start, I have had her read it, start to pray it, and then it gets to this dark section of that psalm that I forgot was there. It was not where I, as a pastor, would have chosen to go, but it was exactly where we needed to go, where it talks about evil men
Yes.
that have circled around me, and you realize why the psalmist wants to run away and make their bed in the depths of Sheol. Sometimes singing the whole psalm takes you to places where you may not even have the courage to go as a pastor. And that was a profound moment for me that just got me thinking about, the Psalms, it's the whole psalm that really sometimes is important.
What are your thoughts? This is something that people haven't given a lot of thought to, I think, recently, is the paraphrasing or the versification of Psalms. Of course, there are some who believe that if you're going to paraphrase, take the Psalms, put them into your words, or versification, maybe put them in meter. There are some people who are offended by that because it strays from at least the English translation that they know, which kind of, it's not based on the original anyway. Yeah, there is some irony. So this is a practice that used to be done.
Yes.
Historically, we have Watts, but maybe Matt can talk about this. Spurgeon did this. This was a practice that he did in his own church. And was his intent to try to give his congregation something singable? Was that his purpose for paraphrasing these Psalms?
I think even as a more driving factor would be shepherding people through singing. And then the creative part would have followed that first pursuit. But Spurgeon begins his hymn book with a full psalter. That's where it begins.
150.
So even to look at a free church tradition like Baptist history, still psalm singing was regularly in it. Spurgeon even says in his preface to Treasury, if I could have thought of nothing else but the Psalms all day, that would have been great. And psalm singing, I think that would have been a driving factor for him. It's interesting because the Psalms for us do play a really present role in the gathering, we're just not singing them.
Yeah.
There's not a Sunday that goes by, I don't think, we don't read the Psalms.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But they've
Call
been
to worship or whatnot.
That's right, in the
Yeah.
call to worship or confession, thanksgiving, benediction. I mean, the Psalms are present in our gathering, but we're just not singing them. But I do want to be fair to us, because I think we're probably singing them more than we know. Meaning, we're not singing them metrically,
Right.
but I think if you're to evaluate most of the hymns that we sing on a Sunday, they're borrowing language from the Psalms all the time.
True.
And so in that
And
sense,
thoughts as well.
that's right. And so in
Yeah.
that sense, we are singing the Psalms, though not metrically as a primary practice.
Yeah.
So even personally, so I've started writing metrical Psalms. I've done about 15 of them so far. We've never sung one of them, but they've been edifying to me to write.
Yeah. It's good.
Maybe you could
good
share them
process.
with
my,
the world.
my hard
Yeah.
drive, my hard drive
Yeah.
loves them.
Well, let me ask you this. How much does, if you, I don't know if any of you have done any paraphrasing or metrical writing of the Psalms, but how much does that help your sermon preparation?
Well, that's exactly how I've done it. So as preaching through Psalm 1, like just
Right.
to internalize the text in a more profound level, I wrote the Psalm as well.
We did a thing. I was pretty fresh out of seminary, so my Hebrew chops were still, better than they are now. But we did a summer college Bible study in Nashville where a different preacher each week would preach on a psalm, and then I put music to those each week. The end of the summer, we recorded it. That was actually what I call the proto-Indelible Grace record. So before we ever made an Indelible Grace record, we actually did this psalm thing, and it was like a cassette. We made it on a 4-track. It's really horrible.
We'd love to hear it.
A couple of them we eventually, recorded on Indelible Grace CDs. But I was thinking, even if your Hymns of Grace hymnal, like the one song that I know of that comes from Indelible Grace is God Be Merciful.
Yep.
That is the Scottish metrical psalm
Right.
version of Psalm 51. So what he was saying, sometimes we don't even know we're singing them.
yes.
Right.
Sometimes that's true. And one of the things I've tried to find, not only are there metrical psalms or maybe even like singing the actual English text, it's very hard to do with one piece of cyclical music.
Right.
But there's another source, which are hymn writers' versions of psalms. Ann Steele, who's a favorite of
Right.
mine, she did 33 psalms. She does a version of Psalm 88. Whereas Isaac Watts does 138 of the 150 psalms. He doesn't actually do Psalm 88. James Montgomery, Hail to the Lord's Anointed, that's a psalm, okay? He did a whole entire collection of the Psalms. Henry Light, who wrote Jesus on My Cross,
Right.
Abide With Me, he did a complete collection of the Psalms. Charles Wesley did versions of almost every psalm. And that's kind of one of my things I've been trying to explore is hymn writer versions of psalms as another resource that
Right.
we tend to not think about.
Right. Well, and
And there's some good stuff there.
I'm not sure enough people read those resources. I mean, I think Matt's publishing of Isaac Watts was great. I've been reading his Psalms along with the actual Psalms just to get an insight into, when you start reading that, you realize Watts was brilliant.
He was.
He was theologically brilliant. He was artistic. He was poetic. He
some
was,
chops.
yeah. So the question is, can we inspire people, even maybe to look at some of those paraphrases, rework them, and set them for their congregations today? What would you do as a songwriter, Bob? I mean, do you have any inclination in this area?
Well, this whole discussion, is certainly stirring things in me. We've done a few psalms in Sovereign Grace. We did this whole Psalms record.
I thought you did.
Yeah. But I was dissatisfied with it. Like
Okay.
I am a lot of our albums. I think we did an album on Romans. It's not what it should be. And I wish, this was 2008, I wish we had done more specific renderings of the Psalms. I'm going through the Psalms right now, partly in preparation for a video that I'm doing here. Just reading through the Psalms multiple times and looking for how they point to who God is, what He says, and what He's done, and just realizing, oh my, these are a lot richer than I thought. They're because you get what I said to start. You get to a knowledge of God through the struggle. You get to a knowledge of God through duress, through distance, and there are times of just exultant celebration. That's where the Psalter ends. 5 Psalms of just jubilant, enemies barely in sight. It's just, this is where it all ends. But I'm realizing this is a lot more of a process than we're used to in songs. So what it's stirring in me is for songwriters, encouraging songwriters to get deeper into the Psalms, to whether that's writing metrical versions, taking Watts, which is a great project, to take some of his renditions where he's using Britain and England and stuff for
Right.
which we probably wouldn't do. But to take some of those and just adjust them, adapt them, tweak them so that to me the most important thing is, like Kevin was saying earlier, we include the difficult parts of the psalm in our thinking, because when you read Psalm 139 and the part of it that he's referring to is, after, how precious to me are your thoughts, O God, how vast are some of them. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. Oh, men of blood, depart from me. They speak against you with malicious intent. So if you don't hate evil, you don't love God.
Yeah.
And that's just not being promoted in our culture, and that's what the Psalms help us see. There's nothing better than just reading the Psalms over and over, slowly, thoughtfully.
Out loud,
silently, together, just any way we can. One book that has been really had a profound impact on the way I view the Psalms is O. Palmer Robertson's The Flow of the Psalms. You heard that?
I don't know. I know some of others.
Yeah, he's wrote Christ of the Covenants. Yeah. That he just goes through and points out all the patterns in the Psalms. And then I was reading a book this morning that just talked about how the Psalms were meant to be memorized. And the people who put the Psalms together, that a lot of these patterns help memory. We just are so far from that. We just want a catchy chorus. We want something that's going to pop.
Hook,
And the Psalms don't do that. And that makes them so much better, so much richer, because these last. So I would say, read the Psalms, read books about the Psalms, and get to know God through the means that He's given us to know Him, to pray to Him, to sing to Him. And songs are going to come out.
I hope that even what we're doing, is helpful.
Yes.
Because I think, one of the challenges we face in our day and age is we live in a consumer culture. So when you suggest we should sing Psalms, a lot of people hear that as, I like it or I don't like it.
Yes.
And to get something to change, to get a culture to change, I think you have to create culture. So, and people have to see this is beautiful, this can work. Good. This is what Isaac Watts did. He didn't just talk about we should sing hymns. He wrote, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. Like, how could you be like, no, we can't sing that. It's hard to say we can't sing that. But he also talked about why we need to do what we need to do. So that's to me, this starts from the pastor and the preaching and it goes all the way through. Why are we doing what we're doing? It's not just because you like this or don't like it. We need to get people to go beyond that. Worship is formative. To me, that's the key. If worship is formative, like it or not, then we need to attend to the songs that we're singing because they're shaping people. Yes. And as pastors and spiritual leaders begin to realize that, I think it changes the culture.
Matt, as a pastor, when you're writing a psalm in meter, how do you start?
Wherever the psalm starts.
But what is the process you go through, though? How much time do you spend on that?
So I've done, a couple of handfuls of them. That's a hard thing to answer. How much time? I mean, as much time as it is required. I think just to meditate, I'm meditating on that psalm and thinking, how can I say this in a way that would be singable and beautiful? To that point, I mean, the songs we choose, we want to edify people. So there is a teaching process. If we're going to be singing the Psalms, one of the hindrances of singing the Psalms is that it takes so long to draw out thoughts, and they're moving so from category to category within one psalm. And how we understand and express musically today is one or two thoughts rather than developed thoughts. It's too thick. It's too much work. And so to hold in balance biblical faithfulness and also, Colossians 3:16 and Ephesians 5:19, we're wanting to edify and build up the people of Christ in the singing as well. And so there's just a tension there. Edification has to be at the center of it, but there's a teaching that's going to be required there. I still know the verdict's out on culturally how we should sing the Psalms in a way that will be sung beyond just a certain circle of churches.
Mm-hmm. Well, that brings up the other topic, musical accompaniment melodies.
Can I add something before we jump into that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And just as Matt brought up Colossians 3:16, which to me speaks to, okay, does God want us to just keep singing the Psalms exactly as they are? Now, I've had many conversations with exclusive psalmists.
Right.
Never reached a conclusion.
Right.
I mean, never won any of those. Never, no one's ever persuaded anybody.
Right.
If Isaac Watts can't persuade him, we're not going to.
That's exactly what I say. I say just read Isaac's,
the preface.
and no one's going to say it better than he did as to why we need to bring Christ into the Psalms. He's there, but it says, "Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs."
Giving thanks.
Giving thanks
to Jesus.
Yes.
This is what Watts says. You can't give thanks to Jesus if you only sing
you
the
can't.
Psalms.
You can't.
Because you're never going to mention the word Jesus.
And the early Christians, for them, the divinity of Christ was absolutely crucial. So they would be using music as a means of saying, Jesus is God. And so I think we, to songwriters, need to say, look at these through a Christocentric lens. Okay, but you have to know your theology to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
not, okay, I think Jesus is here. We're not just talking about just go crazy.
Right.
But how do these speak of Christ, and where does Christ reveal himself to us in these words? And when we bring the Psalms, bring Christ to the Psalms, I think the effect is wonderful. It's transforming because we see how these were fulfilled, and no one thought about it, I think, better than Watts, and did some amazing jobs with that.
Matt, what did you have?
You
to
published Watts.
Well, the only thing I would add
you
to that,
you got to add
another
something to that.
wonderful defense of hymn singing is Benjamin Keach, 1680s, 1690s. The hymn singing controversy is its full bloom. It's all this publications between Marlowe, this attorney, and his party fighting Benjamin Keach and wanting to sing hymns. Singing the Psalms was assumed.
Yeah.
We're going to be singing the Psalms, but can we also, what is biblically, Psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, how can that best be translated biblically? That was what was at stake. Everyone agreed we should be singing Psalms. Does this allow also for us to be singing hymns?
But the songs that people remember and latch onto are ones that are singable. We live in an age where vocal range has changed. People don't like to sing above even a C anymore. And the culture has so put in their inner ear this sound of what human voices sound like, which is so overly processed, that people don't know how to sing. And then when you choose something high, if you have more than an octave range in your song, it becomes difficult for some people. So we in today's culture have different things to think about when it comes to melodic writing. And my only concern is that people are quick to turn out the things that they can generate that are, maybe 2 measures long and they can repeat numerous times. But real care is not given to writing a melody that communicates the truth and that people can memorably account and remember. And that helps them with the text. And that's why I said earlier, why don't we have a version of a psalm that is as memorable as Great Is Thy Faithfulness, that we've sung for the last 100 years? And we don't have that for some reason. So musically, what can we encourage? I'm not saying that everybody's going to become a great writer of music. I think the important thing for people to remember is it takes work, it takes time, it takes dedication to the craft. And Matt, you talked to me about this last September about simple melodies. So I ask you to give some thought. How do you begin that process of putting some very important and serious words, and if we're talking about the Psalms, communicating some very heavy things, how do you go about matching that up with some sort of melody that fits the human voice and the emotion that goes with that?
Yeah, Matt.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
I'm waiting for this.
Take note. Where's my
Get your
notepad?
notepads ready.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I've been wrestling with that for, 20 years, trying to figure out how to do that. So if a text has more gravity to it, then the melody has to also carry some of that weight to match the tone of what's being sung. And that's very difficult in singing the Psalms. Corner room music,
I was going to mention Adam Wright.
Adam Wright wrote just pure text, Psalm 23, And to describe the melody, it's full of joy and life and like vitality throughout. And it just matches Psalm 23 so beautifully. And to do what he did with Psalm 23 is amazing. It is so challenging to write pure word-for-word translation to music and to keep it melodically interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It either feels very, for me personally, it's been very challenging. I've tried. There's a reason no one's ever heard those because it just feels very.
Well, who's the final say on that
Me.
process? Okay,
Me.
all right.
It feels very wooden or very
Yeah.
clumsy
Yeah.
or very sterile.
Yeah.
No one's going to be edified singing those melodies that I write.
Here's the thing, like, there have been times in the church's history when, hymn or psalms were like the pop music.
Yeah.
I mean, John Whitley, director of the Calvinist Institute of Worship, in his book, Worship Seeking Understanding, has a chapter on the spirituality of the Psalter in Calvin's Geneva.
Right.
And it's unbelievable to read the way that shaped the warp and woof of Geneva.
That's right.
It was the largest publishing enterprise in the history of the world, the Genevan Psalter, when they put it out.
Wow.
The amount of copies they sang, not only did they publish, the versions they sang in church, which were all in unison, because Calvin had a little quirk about that, but they published harmonized versions to sing in families. It went into 9 translations. Wow. You know one of them because you know the Doxology.
Right.
So
And
that's one of the hymn tunes.
Yeah.
Well, and the passion they sang with, right? So that's where they get their moniker being called Genevan
Yes,
jigs.
right.
And they're sung with
Yes.
such passion and vitality.
Yes.
that,
And
like,
with more rhythm.
Yeah, with more rhythm. And
Yes.
it's just like
The Doxology,
engaged
yeah.
psalm singing.
Yeah, the
Whereas
Doxology is
today,
slowed down.
We're talking about the French.
Yeah,
Right?
whereas today,
Yeah.
today if we think about psalm singing, it feels very
Yeah.
formal
Yes.
and
Yeah.
traditional.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
hard
Right.
for us to
You're
imagine
right.
Yeah.
Calvin's Geneva singing the psalms
Yes.
with such
That's right.
vigor.
Well, it's
That's
hard
right.
for us to imagine the accompaniment of the Old Testament. That was probably very percussive,
Yeah.
Yeah.
probably very minor-ish sounding.
Oh, yeah.
But was obviously with vigor and with excitement.
Yeah.
And the
I
other thing
got-
is congregational singing is kind of, the society doesn't know much about congregational singing anymore. Where it used to be kind of a thing. You went to church, you heard people sing. It's kind of faded. We've got bands and we've got lights and we got smoke and all that sort of thing. But my search is, can we write melodies that are excellent and that cause people to sing these psalms, that cause them to remember it? I mean, I'm amazed at Bob because he writes music and somehow genetically he's passed it on. I didn't know that was possible. So if you were to sit down and say, oh, you know what, this talk has inspired me. I want to take such and such psalm and I want to put it to music. What would you, after reading it through multiple times, because I'm assuming you'd start there, how would you start? Would you start singing the words?
Yeah. I would sit down at the piano and I do a lot of, over the years, I've done a lot of spontaneous singing.
Yeah.
And one of the things actually I do sometimes with a music team or a group of leaders is to go through Psalm 100 and I'll just sing it line by line and I'll play some chords under it, just a normal progression. Make a joyful noise to the Lord of the earth, serve the Lord with gladness, come into his presence with singing. Now you sing lines that are meditating on those 2 verses. It's
Okay.
amazing what happens when you engage a spontaneous lyrical response with a tune that you're making up, because it's just meditation.
Right.
It's not charismatic. I mean, I do believe the Spirit is inspiring that, but it's meditation on the text.
Group meditation.
It's group meditation
In song.
In song.
That's awesome.
And then I ask, at the end, so was there any moment where a portion of that psalm was kind of quickened to you? All the time, guys. Yeah. This. Oh, I just never saw this there. And I mean, the Lord is good. I just realized how I haven't thought the Lord is good, and His faithfulness to all generations. I've been worried about my children, and the Lord is. I think it's that kind of engagement that both produces a melody and how might this work together?
Right.
So you start singing a melody and see where it doesn't work there. Okay, well maybe I could drop a word and
Yeah.
But one thing I think that is crucial is that these be melodies that are powerful and compelling. Because in Watts and Wesley's day and they didn't write the melodies. They just wrote the words,
yeah, they
and then they
borrowed
just kind of picked the melodies, and
Yeah.
you know,
Had a half dozen tunes,
yeah,
and they
yeah.
sing the whole
just,
hymn book.
okay,
to that.
let's just sing it to that. Whereas today, because of the access we have to so many songs, if it's not a instantly accessible, or pretty instantly accessible, compelling melody, you've got 1,000 other songs
Right.
waiting to fill that spot.
Yeah.
And so I think it is incumbent upon us to think, I want this to be a great melody, not just
I
a
agree.
good melody.
Yeah.
My process, and this is what I always tell people, is like, for instance, I did a version of Psalm 103 on the last Indelible Grace record, but it's James Montgomery's version of Psalm 103. So
His words.
his words. So I don't have any real skill in text like these guys do. So I'm going to find a text. That's part of
Right.
my creative work, even
Right.
is trying to find a text and digging into James Montgomery's book, The Spirit of the Psalms, which you can get as a reprint on Amazon, and it's worth getting. So I start with that, and then what I like to do, because I'm not a good singer, I think that actually helps me.
Amen.
Because I'm not going to sing a wide range. It's not going to come out of
Yeah,
me.
Yeah.
And I also try to pay attention to motifs, something for people to grab a
agree.
hold of.
I agree.
But what I try to do is, without an instrument in my hand, say the words out loud, try to find the right tempo, the right
good process.
feel, speak it out loud, speak it out loud, speak it out loud, try to turn that into melody. Because most people will only apprehend that by singing.
Yeah.
And I find the melodies are more interesting and they go with the contour of the words better that way than if I start with a guitar and I play some chords and then I try and squeeze the words in.
Yeah.
Hymns and psalms are too wordy, and they feel like you're squeezing the words in if you start with kind of a preconceived chord pattern.
Yeah.
I can tell of the songs I've written which ones started that way with the melody and which ones started with a chord change. And I just tend to find that that's a really helpful process for doing psalms.
Well, I am not a songwriter, but I had so many conductors tell me this. Vocally, the dynamics are in the range. So just because someone says you've got to sing forte here, probably they're making you sing forte on a higher note, higher in your range.
Hopefully.
Yes. So you want to express something forcefully, it's in the range. And that helps me with melodies, is I know when the voice ascends, it becomes more powerful, becomes more prominent, it stands out more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you want that part of it to match your words. That's the only thing I can offer. I've sung lots of melodies.
Yeah.
I know it's congregational. I know people love Nessun Dorma, but Nessun Dorma is almost 2 octaves, and you're not going to sing. That's not congregational.
All right.
So
Well-
I recognize that sort of thing of it, but we need melodies. We need artists in the church, and the body of Christ has them. We have talented people.
Yeah.
But you're right. How many of us listen to a recording and we listen to like the first 5 seconds and decide whether or not we're going to listen to the whole
Yeah.
songs? Isn't that true?
You can know that
Oh.
quick if it's worth listening to.
That's
or not.
right.
Yeah,
That's right.
Spotify has the data on that, and it's
Well-
really depressing how quick people move on.
right?
Oh, they
Oh,
track
man.
that, and you don't want to read about it.
To Kevin's point, so when I'm running a hymn, oftentimes I'll have an opening phrase come to mind, and that phrase is what I build the entire hymn around. Generally, it's the opening line, and with that, with a cadence and the language, kind of just a melody is birthed around that.
Yeah.
Comes
So-
together.
Right,
Yeah.
and so I think to allow, that would also be true of psalm singing, so to allow the cadence and the tone and the
Yes.
nuances
Yes.
of that text you want to accentuate all of those things with the melody.
That's good.
I love your idea of just not writing. Writing on a guitar is the worst practice because you're jamming everything, and that's where you get these very
Yeah. Just stay on
monotone
one
Yeah,
note.
kind
yeah.
of.
Let me put in a word for that, though. I mean, I think you can approach it both ways.
Yeah.
Because what that
It's
does.
good to vary even.
Yeah.
your
If you
process.
have a chord progression going, it gives you instantly an idea of whether you have to jam it in or whether you can kind of spread it out, and that can be a way to go about it too. But the important thing is at the end, it makes sense,
That's
and it
right.
doesn't sound like you've jammed all the words in, or that the music is like
Yeah.
this isn't connected to these
Yeah.
words.
Yeah.
And I think, when you sit down with like a metrical psalm text, you'll generally have a first impression
Yes.
melody, and you usually need to press through that
Yes.
to something
Great
that's more
point.
creative.
Great point.
Because there's just the cliches come first.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you have to, and what you'll see a lot of those texts, there'll be like an AABA. There's often a surprise in that third line. It's really effective if musically you can capture that.
Well, okay, so just as an inspiration, when Keith Getty wrote the tune for In Christ Alone, he first told me he was writing 10 tunes a day. Then recently he said he thinks it was 20. So between 10 and 20 tunes a day for that song. It's only 2 lines. It's AABA, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just so disappointing. I mean, it's so discouraging because it's such a great song.
Yeah.
But it's only 2 melodic lines.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the Lord.
Right.
But it's also hard work.
Yeah. It is. It
Sure,
is.
hard work.
Yeah.
It is.
That
It is.
simplicity,
Yes.
but yet there's profundity.
Well, it's a long meter, verse lyric.
Right.
But it doesn't sound like a long meter. 8 syllables, 8 syllables, 8 syllables, 8 syllables. Those tend to sound kind of wooden and formal, but it doesn't sound like the da 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 da. Da, da,
Yeah, it has a
da,
lilt.
da. It does.
That Irish lilt.
So it's just brilliant.
Yeah.
Over in the UK, they did a modern Psalter, praise hymns, praise with an exclamation point. I think it's the early 2000s, where they did exactly that. Timothy Dudley Smith has stuff in there.
Yeah.
Margaret Clarkson.
Lots of good
Right.
stuff.
Yeah. But
Is it that blue one? It's
purplish blue.
purple-
Yeah.
Why don't we use any of it?
That's a
You
great-
probably don't even know about
it's
it,
over
did
the
you?
UK. It's so
Part of
far
it is
away.
you don't know about it.
It's
the
broke away
distance.
from them.
Yeah, we got it. Sharing resources would help a lot of
it
this.
would. It would.
Yeah.
It's
The
I
shipping
think
over there is expensive.
It's always good to write songs that tie people into the Word of God.
Right.
That not just verses, but songs that aren't just theologically aware, but theologically driven.
Right.
Like they help people understand this is what God is saying to us. So I think a project like that would be wonderful.
And not just biblically aware, but biblically driven.
I think one of the reasons we want to have psalms to sing is not just because we want to fulfill some, duty. We need a psalm. Psalms, as Kevin was saying earlier, Calvin said, that they're an anatomy of the human soul. And there are times we need to sing psalms or psalm-like songs. We had 2.5 years ago, church is about 300, well-respected guy in the church was killed in a car accident Thursday morning. His 4th child was born 6 days later. Sunday morning, we better have songs to sing. And that was, it's the stuff that the Psalms talk about. It's God, I don't understand. God, I don't. We sang "Great Is Thy Faithfulness," but then I had set a new tune with Cooper's "God Moves in a Mysterious Way," which is psalm-like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we will need those songs in the life of the church.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's so important to write them.
Yeah.
One of the reasons it's so important to write them.
And the Psalms do give us that framework. So recent scholarly work in the Psalms shows the architecture of the Psalms with the 5 books and how they're all fitting together. And how even in their organization, there's intentionality in mapping out what's happening in this anatomy of the soul, the framework for singing through all seasons, and for us to think whether we're singing a psalm or a hymn, for us to be singing the entirety of our theological spectrum, of our doctrinal beliefs, of our human experiences. That's what the Psalms gives us.
Yeah.
Psalms give us the language needed to commune with God through every season of the soul. And that's what we want for our churches.
Yes, yeah.
To be biblically faithful, expressive, theologically rich, and the Psalms and biblical hymns give us that expression that we need.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate, gentlemen, you joining us.
thank you
I
for
appreciate your
asking.
help and encouragement. And if we can be a help to the body of the Christ, that's what we want to do. And just help ministries and worship leaders and pastors to be a part of this. So thank you very
Philip.
much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.